to using algebra. If it was a calculator question that you use graphing technology or Desmos, it's really simple. All you would do is type that equation into y1, this equation into y2, or in Desmos, make two different equations, and you just have to find out where do those two graphs intersect. But you've also solved these equations in grade 10 and in grade 11, so I'm going to review how did you solve square root equations in grade 10 and grade 11. First, you might remember you had to isolate the radical. The radical is this part right here. In our question, it is already isolated. But sometimes this minus 6 could have been on the left-hand side as a plus 6. Then you would have to subtract 6 on both sides first. The reason we have to isolate the radical is you can get rid of a square root by squaring. So we can get rid of that square root if we square both sides. So we're going to take this side, put brackets around it, and square it. Take this side, put brackets around it, and square it. Finally, with square root equations, you always have to check your answers. Because sometimes when you square both sides, sometimes you get things that are equal but weren't equal at the beginning. For example, is 3 equal to minus 3? No, they're not equal. But if I square both sides, I'll get 9 equal to 9. And they are equal. So sometimes we get an answer that's wrong, called an extraneous root, when we do the technique of squaring both sides, so we have to check. So what does it look like for our question? Well, if I square both sides, the square root will go away. I will just get 3x plus 2. On the other side, if I square that, I have to multiply it out and distribute everything. Be careful that you... Sometimes I get actual people to write it out, whoops, as x plus 6 times negative 6 plus x. Write it out, multiply by itself, so you remember to do all the arrows and distribute everything. So once I've squared both sides, I look and I'm like, oh, it's a quadratic equation. How do we solve quadratic equations? We make one side equal to 0. So I'll subtract 3x on both sides. I will subtract 2 on both sides. And there was a little bit of a hint in this question that you won't be able to factor this. Did you see that the question said solve to the nearest 1,000? That usually means it doesn't factor nicely. So what do you do if it doesn't factor nicely? You're going to have to use your quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. And you'd have to use your calculator to figure this out. Typing this into your calculator to the nearest 1,000 gives us 12.217 and 2.783. So you would need your calculator for that anyways. So sometimes, unless, right, if it says in the question you have to solve it algebraically, then you can't just type it into your graphing calculator and find out where they intersect. You would need to show this work. Okay, so that's sort of how a final exam, when they do provincial exams, they would say, okay, you can use your graphing calculator, but if we say algebraically, you can't solve it with a graph on your graphing calculator. You can use the graph on your graphing calculator to check if your answers are right, but you wouldn't be able to solve. And finally, after you solve, you need to check your answers. So in checking your answers, we're going to go back to this original equation here, and we plug our answers in and see if they actually work. Now, some properties of square roots. Okay? Square roots, when you square root something, your answer is always positive. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 9 is never negative 3. When we square root both sides, we add the plus or minus. But when you just have a square root is always positive. You never type in your calculator square root of 25. It never tells you negative 5. It always tells you a positive number. So that's an important thing to know, that square roots are always positive, because I can go right away and without doing a lot of heavy-duty math, I can cancel this one out. Because if I plug in 2.7 into the right-hand side, negative 6 plus 2.7 will be negative. And I know right away that that doesn't work. But if I check the 12.2, this side is positive, this side is positive, that one works. So the only answer is 12.2. Questions for practice on this one are number 9.